Okay, it's Saturday, June 20th, 2020. You're back with Barney and Clyde for Season 2, Episode 12. We've got 3 segments today. First off, You'll Never Be Woke Enough. We're going to talk about J.K. Rowling trolling on Twitter. She had the audacity to acknowledge the existence of women. We're going to introduce a new segment heading here called Starting from Zero. And we're going to talk a little bit about the People's Democratic Republic of CHAZ, or CHOP, or whatever it develops into in the coming days before it's finally put the kibosh on. And we're going to talk about the fine line between caring and grandstanding. Do Black Lives actually matter to Black Lives Matter, the organization? Barney Quick, welcome back to our fortnightly exchange. Likewise.
Yes, we do this fortnightly and forthrightly, and we're well into Season 2. We've been at this for quite some time now, and it's becoming ever more popular, and we're really gratified about that. The basic premise, prior to when there's not a pandemic on, we meet in person at the libation station, which is the bar in my home. It's right across the room here from my office, and we always tell folks to pull up a seat and pour yourself something bracing and join us for an hour of riveting examination of matters on the nation's plate currently. And but of course we're doing this remotely now. But we bring beverages. And what do you got today, Clyde?
Well, I have a beer here. This is a called Solo. It's probably backwards in the camera, though. It's called Solo by the Goose Island Brewing Company, which I believe is an Anheuser-Busch buyout. But it's we've talked previously on the show that as I age, my body's ability to process alcohol is greatly diminished, especially at 2 p.m. as it is now. So this is a super low alcohol content beer. It's kind of made to, be a session thing. So most beers most craft beers are from around 5 to 5.5% up to 7, 8, 9, 10% alcohol. So you can get pretty loopy on them pretty fast. And this one has a lot of hop character to it without having a whole lot of stupid amounts of alcohol. It's about 3%, so I can pretty much have a couple of these without getting too over the moon, and only 98 calories per can too, so you can have a couple of these without feeling too terribly guilty. And it kind of tastes like somebody hopped a Bud Light, but it's not the best thing in the world, but it ain't too bad. What are you having?
You may have brought this to one of our sessions. BAI is the brand name, Antioxidant Cocoa Fusion. It's a Madagascar coconut mango beverage, 3% juice. It's got 10 calories and 20% of your vitamin E requirements, 8% of your potassium. Did you bring this? Maybe.
I've brought something by that brand that I guess we say by, but I've never heard it pronounced. So BAI. We've had several things by that brand, but I haven't had that particular thing. So, cheers.
Cheers. It's nice. I'm impressed. I'm pleased.
Well, I can't wait till we can get back to the real libation station and not have to do this over, socially distance. And this might be a good time to tell everybody that the reason things look a little different from show to show is because we've had some technical difficulties with the Zoom application. You probably saw in the last episode there was a lot of voices out of sync with the audio and stuff like that, and so internet connections and all kinds of stuff contribute to that. So we're just doing this chat over Messenger. And so I'm using one webcam, you're using your laptop, and since we have Messenger and it has a little picture-in-picture, anyone who's watching the video might see 2 images of me. I try to hide one of them, but it's still showing a little bit. That's why, is because Messenger puts the picture-in-picture, and I couldn't figure out how to do anything about it. So
Okay. And let me just say a word. I'll try not to make this too repetitive for the long timers, but for anybody who's new to our podcast, Clyde is a libertarian and I'm a conservative, and there's a lot of Venn diagram overlap between our worldviews. And that's because we both put human freedom front and center among our values. We both think it's essential to human flourishing. And there's some things that fall outside of it, foreign policy a lot of times, and certain social issues, if you will, and that kind of thing. But it makes for a lively couple of perspectives at which to come at these things that we do. And we generally do 3 or 4 segments, and we have various segment titles, and then kind of keep our radars attuned to things that come along, current matters that will fit one of those, and we've got 3 today. And our first one is You'll Never Be Woken Up. It's one we do fairly often because there's never any shortage of content.
Never a shortage.
No.
And this one is lovely. I love this one.
Everybody knows who J.K. Rowling is. She became famous for the Harry Potter series of books. And she's continued to write. She's currently working on a series of detective stories, which comes up in an essay she wrote. She has come in for a lot of opprobrium recently because of an essay she wrote at her website.
And I think this started with started with a tweet. She responded to a tweet.
Yeah.
Yes. So someone had. Can you give the backstory on the? Someone had posted something to the effect of. They're trying to be trans-sensitive. They used the phrase "people who menstruate."
Yeah.
Rather than saying women, and I think we should preface a couple things. One, that that this author's name is pronounced J.K. Rowling. I saw a interview with her, and she had said it's rolling like bowling. It's spelled like bowling. It's pronounced like bowling. So that's why I thought trolling with Rowling was fun. And two, this is another example of the left eating its own because she is very, 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 very lefty. This was an ally, and they're attacking their own.
Yeah. Okay. I'm trying to find the. Within her essay where she mentions the tweet that sparked her to write her essay.
That's okay. Let's just.
Yeah, we've got the essay. We'll have the essay up for viewers to refer to, as well as a great National Review piece about all this. That was it. The business about persons who menstruate and she caught all kinds of opprobrium for saying that was just a little bit much. But in her essay, she provides 5 reasons for being worried about the new trans activism, and one of them is that she does a great deal of philanthropic activity. She supports female prisoners and survivors of domestic and sexual abuse, and funds research into multiple sclerosis, a disease that behaves very differently in men and women. She's also an ex-teacher and the head of a children's charity, and she's interested in education and safeguarding. Number 3, she's a much-banned author and is interested in freedom of speech. The 4th, she's concerned about a huge explosion in young women wishing to transition, and she spends a great deal of her essay talking about that. And then especially because she was at one time very unhappy with her body. And the 5th is that as a domestic and sexual abuse survivor, she stands in solidarity with the huge number of women who have histories like hers and who've been slurred as bigots for having concern around single-sex spaces. Numbers 4 and 5 are the ones that she really delves into in her essay at jkrowling.com. And I've noticed this. All of a sudden, there was this huge explosion in young people, particularly young women, wanting to transition. I mean, and it leads to questions such as, were there huge numbers of people who, until trans became mainstreamed in the last 5 to 10 years, were like repressing a huge desire to transition or something? But nobody ever talked about, when I was 14, or when people since then that I've known who were 14 years old didn't, I want to transition. But all of a sudden, and there seem to be a few reasons for it. One, the kind of run with the crowd mentality that's always big with adolescents, wanting to do what the in kids are doing and that kind of thing. And teenage angst, which is, a big part of growing up. I'm a deeply complex person. The world can't possibly understand me, and no one's ever felt the way I do, and that kind of thing, which we all feel,
right,
when we're in our early to mid-teens, and it just seems, and which has led to a lot of doctors helping kids get on hormone replacement therapy, and you even hear about mastectomies on girls who are developing perfectly healthy breasts at age 15 or whatever, and
yeah, they don't want people to have body image issues, but they're creating a whole new type of body image issue.
Yeah. So that concerns her deeply, and also the whole business about people who are, as far as their DNA and their genitalia indicate, are men going into women's bathrooms. Yeah.
Before we get there,
yeah, okay.
Let's go back to the concept of people who menstruate, and I think this is paradoxical. Again, this is the left eating the left because J.K. Rowling is very, very liberal. She's spoken out very liberally, and in the past, she's a huge ally towards leftist causes, and one of those causes previously was feminism. And feminism used to be the celebration of and the pursuit of equality for women, right? So we're talking about...
To have a feminism, you have to have a female sex.
That's right.
Female people, yeah.
That's right. And the left is always moving the goalpost. And one of the goalposts that they moved was there used to be this sort of goal for this colorblind society. When it comes to racial differences, people would be colorblind, and you wouldn't see someone's race. And that was almost, when I was a kid, that was part of the doctrine that we were fed. Was
everybody quotes Martin Luther King's 1963 "I Have a Dream" speech of content of their character,
right. And it wasn't there was no one saying you should erase someone's culture or erase someone's background, but you shouldn't be judging people based on these arbitrary and immutable characteristics. Okay, you should be colorblind as far as race goes. Okay, and then society got like almost there, not quite there, but almost there. And then they said, well, that's actually racist in itself, because now you're erasing the culture and you're not celebrating who that person is as defined by their heritage and their culture and their background and their lived experience. But that's exactly what the left is doing here to women. They're erasing womanhood, because there are a lot of people who don't menstruate that are women. Menopausal women who've had health issues that have caused that. Women on certain types of birth control. There are lots of people who don't menstruate that have two X chromosomes and are biologically women, who also express themselves in a female or womanly, feminine gender identity. And up until this point, that was something that was absolutely critically part of the left agenda to be celebrated, was that feminine power and that feminism, and they just want to erase the concept of a woman, and I think that's disgusting.
Yeah. And there are a lot of feminists who are taking umbrage at this.
They should.
Yeah. A spokeswoman for Fair Play for Women said that J.K. Rowling speaks for the silent majority, and a huge number of women will be grateful to her. The board, Natasha Chart, the board chair of the Women's Liberation Front, expressed gratitude for Rowling's solidarity with all the other women who have suffered the same unfair monstering for speaking the truth.
Right. Why don't people want to protect feminism? If a man can just walk into feminism and claim it for their own, how's that not the worst thing to happen to feminism? If a dude can just show up and be like, "Meh, this is mine now."
Yeah.
You did all the work, but I get all the benefits. Cool.
Yeah. Indeed. I don't know what the very, very latest is on this. I haven't seen anything in, say, my Twitter feed or anything like that. I don't know if the furor has died down or it's gotten worse. She's getting more ostracized. Right?
Oh yeah, she's getting burned up, and she's getting burned up by the former cast members of the Harry Potter series.
Yeah.
And the guy who played Ron Weasley, I forget his name, and Daniel Radcliffe, the guy who played Harry Potter, they've both come out to condemn her for saying transphobic things. And she didn't say transphobic things.
No,
she just said that women are women, and you shouldn't be erasing the concept of a woman. In fact, here's a tweet from her from late in 2019, so pretty recent history here. And she says, "Dress however you please, call yourself whatever you like, sleep with any consenting adult who'll have you, live your best life in peace and security, but force women out of their jobs for stating that sex is real, ? And then she puts a couple of hashtags to indicate a specific incident. So this is a woman who's very liberal. This is a person who believes in freedom. This is a person who aligns herself with leftist causes. And it's a shame that they're going to excoriate her over this, because I picture the modern left and it's disenfranchised, lack of central leadership, just as this big sausage maker, and they're taking all these liberals and they're putting them in the top of the sausage maker, and they're turning the crank, and they're just churning out conservatives, Yeah. And people like Dave Rubin, Sam Harris, Candace Owens, Scott Adams, Owen Benjamin, people like these who are lefty type people who now align more with the right, and if they're not necessarily right wingers, they certainly have more of a right-leaning audience and more gratitude from the right than from the left, just for saying simple, sane things like this, like women exist and should be allowed to.
Yeah, and this is kind of a common theme of all three of our segments today, that the parameters on what is permissible to say, and I'm not talking about inflammatory, outrageous stuff. I'm talking about just common sense stuff that everybody under their breath saying, yeah, that's common sense.
Right.
Nobody can say it out loud anymore. The parameters on what you can point out,
right.
This notebook is blue, you're a notebookist for saying that, I mean, it's, you know what I'm saying?
It's exactly like that. And I think it's because they don't care about the cause anymore. They don't care about equality. They don't care about the cause. They just care about the attacks. The attacks are what's in vogue. Who can you add to your political body count? And the only thing you can do to these people is to completely and utterly reject them. You can't try to align with them at all, or they will one day eat you.
And I think that's one way that's manifesting itself. I'm digressing here a little bit, but it's probably important for us to get this in today. Uh, the statues that are coming down are no longer just of Nathan Bedford Forrest and Stonewall Jackson, or even George Washington, Thomas Jefferson. It's now getting a Catholic saint, a statue of a Catholic saint came down yesterday, and an abolitionist, the statue of some famous abolitionist. I can't remember who, but they're pulling that kind of stuff down.
That's crazy.
And
the
message is we're in charge now. I mean, it's very Jacobin. It's mob mentality.
Yeah, I mean, I think it would be not to digress, but I think it would be much more accepted by the public if the argument was to be made we should put Harriet Tubman and Sojourner Truth on Mount Rushmore, then we should pull George Washington down.
Yeah.
You know?
You bet. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway,
that would be more inclusive.
Well, but those are American heroes. They really are, and they should be celebrated. And that's the problem, is that we can't share in each other's heroes. We were just talking the other day in my home. It was Juneteenth, and I personally think that Juneteenth should absolutely be a U.S. holiday.
Makes sense to me.
But I don't know if I'm allowed to celebrate it. I don't know if I'm allowed to have my friends and family over to celebrate this. I feel like I should be, because that's really when America started to embrace its own ideals, like 150 years after its own founding, to starting to just barely on the cusp of maybe walking its own walk. I think that should be celebrated, but I don't know how that would be received. But again, I digress.
Yeah, well, and let's see. Segment 3 is when we get into all this.
Yeah, we're going to get into that pretty.
Yeah, but because
delicate.
But I will just say at this point, the question becomes, I would argue that you should be able to celebrate it, because of the idea that slavery per se is evil, and we ended it with that. The race of the people who had been enslaved happened to be black, but it's an idea that slavery is evil, and we are now ending it, is something that's universally applicable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so, and that also negates the feelings of a lot of people at the time. We talk about all these founding fathers and these people from long ago who had these racist, bigoted views and held slaves and all this kind of stuff. But a lot of people went to great risk and expense and suffering in order to turn that tide and to change that.
Absolutely.
And I think that we should all celebrate that. We should celebrate everyone who was a part of that was on the good side,
Yeah.
And I have no love for Confederate statues or anything like that. They could all go. And in fact, I'm very skeptical of hero worship in general. So statues and idols. In fact, if you're a biblical person, the concept of an idol in the Bible, as I understand, it's not just other gods. It's idols of any kind, and
golden calves and all that.
Yeah, and not just to represent gods, but idol worship, and human beings could be idols. You could worship people, and take your eye off of worshiping God. But again, I digress.
Yeah.
But the point is that there should be a celebration of people that are so brave that they went against the times, they went against the culture, they went against the guns and the forces that existed at that time to do what's right in the world. And I fear that we will lose sight of that.
Yeah. Okay, well, how are we doing time-wise?
Well, we've only got 3 segments, so we're right about time to move on.
Okay. And segment 2 is going to be pretty interesting. We're going to look at CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, also known as the Capitol Hill
Capitol Hill organized protest.
Okay. And I'd like to start by there's a couple pieces that have to do with this. One is called the Seattle Soviet by Matthew Continetti at the Washington Free Beacon, and he draws parallels to the 1871 Paris Commune, which is something I had not thought about for a while. But the Paris Commune was an experiment, if you will, that lasted for a couple months in the spring of 1871 in Paris, and it was the whole 19th century was pretty tumultuous politically for France. You had the Jacobins, and then they were superseded by the Napoleonic Empire, and then you had a return to monarchy for a little bit, and then you had a republic, and then the Napoleon's nephew, I think it was Napoleon III, came back to power for a little bit in the middle of the century, and then you had a second republic and a third republic, and the third republic was just getting going when the Paris Commune got going in 1871. Adolf Thiers was the president of the Third Republic, and he didn't have their government didn't have such a good grasp on things. So this bunch of lefties of the day, a bunch of progressives, and that set up quite a bit like the CHAZ in Seattle right now. We're just going to spontaneously govern ourselves and without thinking through, how are we going to eat? How are we going to keep people safe? With, some basic questions like that. And then the Thiers government, the Third Republic, kind of got its act together and moved in and dismantled the whole thing. Said, no, you're all done here, people. But which is not happening with Seattle. Seattle's placating them. As a matter of fact, the mayor is trying to make it sound like some kind of a groovy hippie experiment or something. She likens it unto a block party, which is, the truth is more like protection rackets. And I just last night there was a shooting and that got one person killed, and the perps are still at large. And I mean,
can I play devil's advocate for just a minute, though? Like, sure. I kind of think that might be the best attitude to take, is to just stand back, let this experiment play out, because you're going to learn a lot about it. We're going to learn a lot about society, and we're going to learn a lot about ourselves. We're going to learn a lot about these movements by letting this play out, and downplaying it as just like it's kind of like just a big block party. Just for a public official to not just be pulling their hair out, oh my God, they've taken over a section of the city, like it's pandemonium, it's Armageddon, there's anarchists, and the sky is falling. Just be like, meh, it's a bunch of kids dicking around and having a big block party, and pretty soon they're going to get hungry and need to use the toilet, and they're all going to come home, and right. That might be just the smoothest, most baller thing I've ever heard.
Yeah,
it might be weak sauce too. It might be inexcusable weakness on her part too. I don't know, but it's one of those two.
Yeah, but just don't give the thing any more oxygen than a bare minimum, and it'll just kind of run its course.
Right.
I can see that. But the other one, the other thing that came to mind, and I cannot remember where I saw this referenced, but it was a piece about CHAZ, and they referenced an article by the great Tom Wolfe in the December 1987 issue of the American Spectator, a piece he had called "The Great Relearning." Tom Wolfe, one of his early books, of course, was the Electric Kool-Aid Acid Test, where he hung out with the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area hippies at the height of the summer of love, and did a new journalism kind of examination of that. And so this is like about 20 years later, in the late 80s, and he writes, in 1968 in San Francisco, I came across a curious footnote to the psychedelic movement. At the Hyde-Ashbury Free Clinic, there were doctors who were treating diseases no living doctor had ever encountered before, diseases that had disappeared so long ago they never picked up Latin names, diseases such as
Wow.
the mange, the grunge, the itch, the twitch, the thrush, the scruff, and the rut.
Are you sure
And
this
how was
wasn't the concert lineup?
and how is it that they have now returned? And he goes on to say, this was the creme de la creme of American society, upper middle class kids who were choosing to live this way. And among the codes and restraints that people in the commune swept aside quite purposely were those that said you shouldn't use other people's toothbrushes or sleep on other people's mattresses without changing the sheets, or drink from the same bottle of Shasta, or take tokes from the same joint. And then he goes on to talk about some previous example. He says what the hippie ethos was trying to start from scratch to invent society, starting from zero. And he says it was the same thing. And then he talks about the Bauhaus school of architecture in Germany that got going in the 1920s. Walter Gropius and that bunch, and who kind of paved the way for modernist architecture. And turns out that all those flat roofs let in too much heat, and there was no place for the rain to go. And then, of course, he says, in politics, the 20th century's great start from zero was one-party socialism, also known as communism or Marxism-Leninism. And the idea that you could invent a fresh society without taking any cues, without having any reference to what we've learned from history, from previous societies, somebody, and I can't remember who, brought up this Wolf essay from 1987 in reference to CHAZ, and saying that that's what these people think they're going to be able to do, is start from zero and invent society all over again in a way that nobody ever has, and there are other examples that abound. New Harmony, Indiana, and the Robert Owen and those English socialists in the very early 1800s. It just didn't work.
Yeah, it's again, it's a great experiment. Like they're all going to learn a ton about real life. What was it? They are immediately finding out that they need the basic necessities of life. They need food. They need security. They need cooperation amongst themselves, right? And so in a few, what's it going on, a week of their occupation here?
June 8th, I think, is when they took over.
Okay, so a good couple weeks. But they're already experiencing food shortages. They've already got a border wall, because they've got the concrete pylons all around. They've got people securing their border. They seem to have, I haven't been there, they seem to have people who are patrolling that border. And they've got racial inequity, which I think is fascinating. There's an article here in, what is this magazine? The Seattle Eater. Okay, this is a culinary magazine, culinary online magazine. And they're just talking about food. What kind of food is going on in this place? And it's really forgiving. So they're talking about how there's these cool stands set up, and there's bread, and there's kind bars, and there's all this granola and stuff like that that's available for people to just come and take, and people are sharing, and there are these different chefs who have provided food and provided even ice cream and all kinds of stuff. Apparently free of charge in a lot of cases, and it all seems really groovy and really awesome, except that these people aren't wanting to eat ketchup sandwiches, but there's food. Yeah. There seems to be food, and it's diminishing, but then we find this one photo in this article, and they're talking about how this person, one forward thinker, was like, well, we need to plant a garden. We need to get the next wave of food. So one forward-thinking person has
Yeah.
planted a garden at least, and there's a couple shots of it, and it looks like one bed of lettuces, and I have no idea what they're actually growing in this place. It's brand new. It's just getting started. Whatever. They probably will never get to a harvest before they're all arrested or driven away. But one bed of lettuces is not going to support your cause, man. You need carbs, you need fats, you need proteins. Like, you can't live off of kale and arugula. You can't support a revolution on a belly full of greens. You got to get macronutrients in your bellies if you're going to fight the people's revolution. And in this garden, you can see, and I'll put this screenshot up for everybody, but you can see that they've got signs here that says Black and Indigenous Garden. This garden is for Black and Indigenous folks and their plant allies. So that's basically, and you see a bunch of white people standing around. So there's a lot of white people in this place. There's a lot of white allies to these people in this place. And it just makes me wonder, how long is it going to be that these people will remain allies? How long are white people in this place going to exist as a second-class type of citizen before they're just like, hell with it, I'm out, And then will they be, if they actually keep this place very long, are they going to be able to get out? Well, is that going to be acceptable? Can they just go home?
That's a good question. Because we all know of certain kinds of experiments of this nature where you don't get to leave. Cuba is a good example of that.
Right.
Eventually, if we're gonna take this thing seriously as a sovereign political entity. And if it's going to be anything more than a failed state, it's going to have something to trade with the outside world. In order to get things it needs, medical technology, for instance.
Right. So far, every resource that exists inside this zone is the leftover product of capitalism. Yeah. Right. That's what they're consuming.
Where are they getting their power? Do they have generators set up, or how does that work?
I have no idea.
And
they're being granted, I think they're being granted their cell phone service. I mean, it wouldn't be anything for the way cell phones work is you have these cell towers and they create a sort of a trigram grid. You have the three towers, and the area that those three towers cover is a cell, and then you put another tower, and then you've got another cell, because you still have the three towers piggybacking on the other two, right?
Yeah.
So you have these different cells. It wouldn't be that hard for them to turn off the cells that cover this set of 6 blocks. The government could probably subpoena that action to happen. I don't know if subpoena is the right word, but I'm sure that they could force the issue. So you must turn off these cell towers that cover this area. But they're not doing that. They haven't so far. Why not?
Yeah. At this point, there's a whole lot of dependency upon what the blessings of the outside world, of capital, of the free market, and societies that go back a ways and haven't started from zero. Yeah.
Right. It's. I want to see it. I don't think that these people are excused in their occupation of private property. Right. They're not just holding government land. Right. A lot of people have drawn the comparison to the Bundy family out in Oregon that held a federal facility for some time. But it's not really fair to make that connection, because they're not just holding state or government property, they're holding private property.
Yeah. And you're even hearing about some shakedown activity, intimidating shop owners or restaurant owners to provide them with things they need. And yeah, so
so according to City Journal, here's a quote from the City Journal. Almost immediately, activists established a social structure based on reverse hierarchy of oppression. Native American, Black, and trans women are the highest authority. Diversity determines an individual's social status, and whites are called upon to perform rituals of atonement. Through a series of speeches and community gatherings, activists have sought to implement social theory of decolonization, which is, in the words of Black Lives Matter activist Nikita Oliver, means overthrowing capitalism, eliminating the structure of patriarchy, white supremacy, and classism, and returning the land of the autonomous zone to displaced Native American tribes. Which I think is full of contradictions. I mean, overthrowing capitalism. I just don't think that these people understand how capitalism has worked to lift people out of poverty. And there's certainly corruption in it and bad actors in it. But if you look at overwhelmingly across the world, the blessing that capitalism has been to the world, at least in comparison to socialism.
Yeah.
Eliminating the structures of the patriarchy. Well, there they might be onto something, because the majority of violence, let's face it, is committed by males. It just is.
Yeah.
And this case is no different. So if they want to do something different, then maybe they should have a less patriarchal society. And classism isn't good, but they will find that classism is not a product of capitalism. It's a side effect of human nature, and that classism is diminished in proper capitalism way more than it is in any other system that's ever been tried in the world. And returning the land of the autonomous zone to displaced Native American tribes. Okay, when are they going to do that? And when do all of the white people, Black people, Asian people, Latinos, and everyone else in this zone that's not a member of one of the tribes that actually occupied this specific land, when are they getting the hell out?
Yeah. A sociologist named Stephen Goldberg back in 1973 wrote a book called The Inevitability of Patriarchy. And it's just kind of simmered beneath the surface because feminism is such a louder viewpoint than that. But he shows that societies inevitably wind up being patriarchally arranged. Stephen Goldberg was the guy's name, and he shows that, and it doesn't necessarily mean a repressive arrangement. But it's just that men just kind of take the reins of a situation by it's built into their DNA, and what I'm saying here may get me some slings and arrows up, but the point being that they turn this over to indigenous people. Well, what? That's a broad term too. There were tons of indigenous peoples, many of which went to war with each other, conquered each other, enslaved each other before Europeans ever arrived. Which one are you gonna give priority to in this Seattle autonomous zone? And how are you gonna make sure they are not patriarchal?
And do you have any business dictating to them that they should or should not be?
Yeah.
If you're respecting their culture.
Exactly.
Yeah. The idea and the lie that indigenous cultures or that war and strife and suffering and oppression began when colonists landed on this continent is absurd.
You bet. Yeah, I mean there were some vicious wars between
Now, that doesn't excuse
tribes and nations.
that doesn't excuse what was done by colonists to indigenous people, not by any
Yeah.
stretch of the imagination, but there was certainly a lot of bloodshed going on in this continent before any Europeans arrived on it.
You bet. Okay. What do you think? Have we thoroughly examined?
Have we beat that one into the ground? Well, I just want to cap it off by saying, again, the white people in this zone, getting turned into second-class citizens, and this setup of this garden. If this is real, I mean, how much of the news can you really take as real? I'm not really sure, but the idea that you can't eat from the community garden, I just think that this proves that these people are going to turn into everything that they hate. And if they want to defend this zone and they want to keep it, they're going to have to do some nasty things that their former CHAZ chop selves would never have considered.
Yeah. We all know about the addition to the slogan that was painted on the side of the barn in Animal Farm.
Right.
Started out saying all animals are created equal. And one day the animals looked at, wait a minute, it says more than that now.
Right. Yeah, some animals are more equal than others.
You're right. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna draw a Animal Farm parallel here, but I didn't want anyone to misconstrue my statement with maybe comparing the people within this zone to animals. Because that's the way people will do. So you call them animals. It's like, no, it's a book. It's a story, and it will play out much like that if it's given legs. If it's allowed to continue to exist, then it will be given legs. And like you said about trade in Animal Farm, eventually the hogs decided that they needed more resources, so they started cooperatively trading with other farms, even though those farms were actively oppressing the animals, on those farms. The pigs didn't care. They didn't care that there were pigs and horses and cows and sheep suffering on the other farms. They were selling the grain, and they were selling the milk, and they were selling the eggs, the things that the population cared about the most, about keeping. And they'll have to do the same thing in this place.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to keep an eye on this. How long can they sustain anything, and what will it peter out as people say, "Oh man, fall semester of grad school is about to get going. I'm gonna get back to normal life," or on the other, will it turn into something real dark and ugly?
It could just dissolve, or it could turn into a Waco.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
really scary to think of. And in any case, if that happens, if the authorities have to go take this place back by force, and eventually they will, because again, it's private property. They can maybe let them have the police precinct or whatever that they're holding, but there are individuals who have private property in this zone, and it needs to be returned to the rightful owners. And eventually, force will have to be undertaken, and if that has to happen, it may be justified, but it's certainly not going to do this cause any good. It's just going to drive the division harder and wider apart.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's all keep an eye on that. It's going to be interesting to watch how it continues to unfold. Time for segment 3?
I think so.
Okay. This one. You approached me earlier and said, how shall we frame this in order to come across as constructively as possible? I mean, that might not have been the way we worded it this morning. But
my concern was that in this day of cancel culture, that there are certain opinions you're not allowed to have, and certainly things that you're not allowed to say. Whether or not those things are true and based on demonstrable facts.
Yeah.
There are certain opinions that you still can't have. And I've put some together here, and I don't know what your thoughts are. I don't want to get either of us in trouble But I do want to go through some facts.
And part of these, I think I know, we discussed this last time. We put up the the platform page on the Black Lives Matter website. And we were just talking about intersectionality and identity politics stuff. The three women who founded Black Lives Matter have had and have an agenda that goes way beyond just impressing upon the general public that Black lives are as important as anybody else's lives. I mean, the phrase sounds very innocuous. Well, duh.
Right.
Who wouldn't think Black Lives Matter?
Right. I love the phrase.
Yeah, but it's kind of a dare. It's kind of like, you got some objection to that? Well, of course I don't. Well, the formal organization called Black Lives Matter has bigger, there's much more to their agenda. Anyway, you go ahead. But there are, as you were saying, there are objective facts that you can point out that ought to be pointed out.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So let me try my best to do this. And again, I want to approach this delicately because I really do understand what to the best of my ability, what people are trying to say here. I'm certain that it's not easier being a black person in the United States than being a white person. Okay, I believe that there's a lot of racism in America, and that much of what has led to the state of many of the predominantly black communities is a result of the legacy of the way blacks were treated throughout history, and slavery and Jim Crow and redlining and lots of unacceptable practices like that. Okay. I think that there are real racial inequities within our justice system. My problem is that I believe these things, but I cannot prove them. And as I've been looking into the real data on the matter, and if I dig into it at any more than the most basically surface levels, and think about it in ways that are multivariable analyses, a lot of it goes away. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So on the last podcast, we talked about our last fortnight. We played some clips from Larry Elder, a black conservative radio pundit who's a former attorney, and he poked some holes in the narrative of systemic white racism and white supremacy as the root of all of the inordinate number of black victims of the deadly use of force by police. He and Mr. Elder rejected the notion entirely, stating that deadly use of force in law enforcement was rare, and that whites were more likely to die at the hands of police than blacks, both in raw numbers and in percentage of police contacts, and that in general, when it comes to deadly violence among private citizens, that the perpetrator is almost always the same race as the victim. Violent crimes where there's a death involved, it's people who know each other. They have some kind of situation or some kind of animosity towards each other already in their personal lives. But that when there is a cross-racial violent crime, when there is a murder of a person where the victim and the perpetrator are of different races, it's disproportionately that the victim is white and the perpetrator is black. I'm gonna pause a little bit here, and I apologize for that. I might edit some of the pauses out for time and continuity, but I want to make sure I choose my words wisely and properly here. Okay. So a lot of people bring up Chicago and the insane amount of deadly violence that occurs in Chicago.
Yeah.
So far this year, we're 6 months in, and Chicago has had more violent deaths than last year.
Than the entire year of 2019.
The entire year of 2019.
Wow.
Most of the crimes against African Americans occurs by African Americans. The people who call the police for help the most, by an enormous factor, are African American. There was a study done here, I think the University of Michigan. I'll make sure that everyone who listens to this or watches this on YouTube has access to the articles and papers that we're referencing here. But it was not found that of the officers who were likely to use force against a black perpetrator, there was very little difference found between white cops and black and Latino cops. And that black and Latino cops were actually more likely to use deadly force against a black perpetrator than a white cop.
Okay.
Okay. So here's another one. One of the things that you see always come out, well, the justice system is racially biased because the sentencing is harsher for black people. And if you look into that, that is true. Black people are more likely to have a harsher sentence than white people for the same crime. It also looks like they're more likely to have a prior record than white people.
Okay.
And that judges, if they're not being racially biased, would have to take that into account. I'm looking for the systemic racism. I'm looking for the smoking gun.
Yeah.
And I can't find it. And I'm not a statistician, but I have this huge hole in my heart for people who are suffering, and you watch these videos and they're just really horrific. These things happen to white people, it turns out, more than it happens to black people when they have encounters with law enforcement. And it turns out that that's the case, not in just the numbers of the general population, but also in the numbers of people who have contacts with the police. So white people are dying at the hands of police, whether justified, unjustified, armed or unarmed, at a greater rate than black people are. It doesn't excuse any of the horrible crimes that some law enforcement agencies have committed against those people, those black citizens who deserve their constitutional rights and their right to life and liberty. But if we're looking at the condition of race relations in America, like we are missing it. I don't know what we're missing, but we are missing it. Maybe the data's not right. Okay, I don't know. Maybe this data's wrong. There's not a centralized database for this. You have to depend on each police department's data. You have to depend on each court's data. And then you have to compile all that, and you have to trust all the many hands that have been moving this thing or compiling all this data from different resources to have done a thorough job. And then there's also this statistic where, according to the FBI, there were 4,787 offenders where the race was unknown. Okay? That seems like a pretty high number. So maybe that's enough to throw the percentages. Maybe there's a huge a variable that we're not seeing here. But
Yeah.
to me, it seems like if we're looking at the treatment of the citizenry by police, there are a lot of incidents that you could point at, and you can point at one arbitrary incident or another, a black person or a white person, and you could come up with completely different, conflicting assumptions about the nature of police violence.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And thank you, Clyde. And I think you did a great job of responsibly putting out some statistics that are there. And as I say, the other thing, the plain fact of the matter is that these three founders, Alicia Garza, Patrice Cullors, and Opal Tometi, from the get-go in about the middle of the last decade, have had an agenda that's very much intersectionally identity politics driven. The Black Lives Matter Global Network website says that Black Lives Matter affirms the lives of Black, queer, and trans folk, disabled folks, Black undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all this dismantle the police. One of their platforms is getting rid of prisons and so forth, and they even get into environmental stuff, and moving away from fossil fuels and the whole bit. It's that when people in communities large and small across America gather on the steps of City Hall to hold rallies and chant Black Lives Matter, the phrase itself sounds very innocuous, but what you are doing is reinforcing the strengthening an organization that goes by that name that has a bigger agenda than just impressing upon the public that Black lives are as important as other lives.
Right.
There is more to it than that. Also, and Larry Elder, and along with some others such as Star Parker, point out that only 30% of Black Americans are growing up in a home with two parents there. And Larry Elder talks a lot about fatherlessness and you know, and I think we brought this up last time too. The white sociologist turned politician back in the 1960s, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, wrote a paper for the government on the state of the Black family, and he came in for all kinds of backlash over it, and it's continued to be a document that causes strong emotions and so forth. But what it points out that the Black family was beginning to unravel has only the statistics have only gotten worse on that. Mm-hmm. And this is not racist to point this out. It's just objective numbers, and if you care about minorities and you care about human suffering, then you have to use facts to figure out what the problem is so that it can be addressed. Exactly.
And throwing sticks and stones at people that try to do that is counterproductive. And in the Black Lives Matter About Us section on their website, they talk about how they reject the notion of the prescription of nuclear family, the Western nuclear family, and it's like, okay, that's fine. Like, there's nobody in this country that's would force anyone to live a certain way as far as that nuclear family. I don't want you to have to. I want you to be able to do whatever you want to do, but
if your organization has the goal of moving the entire society away from that being the norm, then.
But it's clear that aside from, abusive parents or things like that, that two-parent households are better than single-parent households. And not because the single parents aren't admirable or doing their best or amazing, and some of them are, I can't believe they accomplish what they accomplish.
Yeah.
But there's no question that a two-parent household, and it doesn't look like, so far from what I've seen, and again, I'm not a statistician and I'm not a deep data analyst, but it does seem like even same-sex arrangements, that children are better off with two parents rather than one. And that may just be division of labor and all the things it takes to raise kids. So to say that, to say that doesn't work, it's like, okay, well, you might be rejecting the prescription that actually helps solve the problem, or at least one of the many things that are necessary.
Yeah.
And that's really sad.
And putting blackness front and center, first and foremost, among a person, back to the colorblind society that we were talking about earlier in the show, does a disservice to people who happen to be black of assuming that they think a certain way, that they all think in lockstep. I mean, what are we to make of the coalition of African American pastors that was very involved in trying to prevent Obergefell versus Hodges from being decided the way it was, and they condemned the Supreme Court striking down the Defense of Marriage Act, and there are conservative blacks that
what gives?
See things very differently.
Why would the conservative movement be growing amongst blacks? Why would Trump support amongst young African American males be growing? Why?
You bet, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it denies collective ascribing collective guilt to whites, or collective victim status to blacks, deprives people of their agency as individual human beings.
Right, and if we do that, we can't actually solve the problem, which means that the lives and livelihoods of the average minority person is not going to improve. And so, and further, if we have to keep chasing this notion of systemic racism in policing and in the court system and things like that, where you can actually use the data that exists to draw conclusions that negate that is a factor, by and large. There's clearly examples of it, but that's not systemic. Why would you keep chasing that ghost when so many people are actually dying and suffering because of violence in their neighborhoods? And again, I'm not saying like black people are responsible for the violence against black people, but there's something going on where I don't know if it's the fact that black people are much more likely to live in concentrated poverty than other demographics. I suspect that it is. A lot of people say that it's over policing those neighborhoods. That if the police were to be removed from those neighborhoods, that there would be less of this type of thing. And there seems to be studies that show that when that is done, again, it's called the Ferguson effect. We've talked about it before, but that when police stop actively patrolling neighborhoods, that homicides go up. Now that doesn't necessarily mean that crimes by the police against citizens doesn't go down. Maybe it does. I haven't seen that figure. But this is really hard to figure out. But the glaring body count, the enormous amount of suffering that's being perpetuated against the black community is not being perpetuated against them by white people by and large. It's bigger than that. It's different than that. And I don't think Black Lives Matter knows either, and I think that they're not trying to figure it out. I think they'd rather, and rightly, they should chase the case of George Floyd. Like I thoroughly think that and Philando Castile, who was a legal gun permit holder, who was shot senselessly. I absolutely believe that they should be following up those cases and working for justice.
Let's see justice done. Absolutely.
But why are they so? I mean, when I say they, I mean the organization Black Lives Matter. Why are they so against the values that make strong families and make strong citizens that could actually help those who are suffering? That really breaks my heart.
Yeah. You're getting to a hugely important point here, and I think about the richness of black contribution to overall American culture, and there was a time when that contribution consisted of the likes of Langston Hughes and Duke Ellington and Lena Horne and Billy Eckstein and Charlie Parker and Billie Holiday and so forth, and Nora Zeal Hurston and you have to have a cohesive social fabric in order to have a rich culture, and that's true. Now I'm kind of getting into an area that's a particular interest of mine. I mean, that's true of the overall culture. Where's American art generally? But yeah, but you certainly see it. Where's our William Grant Still or our Duke Ellington today? Anyway.
And I think as a libertarian, there is just about no other figure more important than Frederick Douglass.
Oh yeah.
I mean the autobiography, I think The Life and Times of Frederick Douglass by Frederick Douglass, is one of the most fascinating accounts of the struggle for liberty any individual has ever undergone, and it's a beautiful book. I fully recommend it.
I think the overall point to be driven home here is that the needle doesn't move if we leave certain facts off the table, and that's true of specific incidences that have gone on, between police and citizens. It's true of trends. You have to have all the facts out there on the table.
Are you familiar with a podcaster named Sam Harris? He's a neuroscientist. He wrote a couple books, and he's become really popular. His podcast has been pretty popular. He's had a few different ones, but he's really gone out on a limb. And if he were on any network that he didn't own, he would be so canceled right now. I mean, absolutely canceled. And the guy is he's just a scientist who wants to get to the bottom of data. And I don't think that means he's always correct, but he's always objectively analyzing. And he recently had a podcast episode, his most recent one, I can put a link to it if needed, where he really dissects this stuff and provides all of the data to back it up. And it's 2 hours long, but man, is it worth a listen. And I don't recommend Sam Harris lightly. Like, I like his take on a lot of stuff, but to listen to him, he's about as boring as an old English brown shoe. He is just absolutely horrible to listen to. Absolutely as dry and monotone as you could get. It's terrible. But he does a fantastic job of breaking down the real numbers and the real data as it is today. And one thing that's interesting that he points out, because he hates President Trump, absolutely loathes President Trump.
Okay.
And one thing that he points out is that Trump is actually calling for the creation of a national database on police violence, on police misconduct, so that there's one central repository where everyone has to report to as far as, who did it, who was the victim, what were the outstanding circumstances. So we'll have the demographic data one day that shows this, a much more clearer picture, rather than we've got a lot of data, but the problem with a lot of data is it's all fragmented and it's done by hundreds and thousands of different organizations and has to be compiled. So say what you want about President Trump, but he is calling for a national database on police violence, and I think a big motivating factor for that is to get clear about what's actually happening to minorities and fix a problem that the public is demanding we fix.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, we do this fortnightly and forthrightly. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and hope you are too. Thanks for tuning in. If you want to be part of this conversation, there are a lot of ways to do it. You can email us. What's the address again?
Barney and Clyde show at gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
You could also email me directly, info@clydemyers.com, if you prefer.
There you go. Chime in on the comment threads on our Facebook page or our YouTube channel.
Send us direct messages on our Facebook page.
Support us at Patreon.
Yep, you can support us, patreon.com/Barney and Clyde. But yeah, I really, I've been saying this for the last couple episodes, and so far no one's turned any in. But if you've got something to say, I want to hear it, whether it's Barney, Clyde, you're wrong as hell, and here's why. Or you're right, here's why, or here's what we think you did a good job on, or here's just something I was thinking about that's been bothering me that I think you guys should address, or that I'd like to address. Send us an op-ed. We will play it. We will post it. We will read it. Send us your feedback. And if you want to contribute to the show in a non-monetary fashion, get a hold of us. There's stuff you can do for sure. We need original music. We need somebody to clip clips. We need people to send us links. We need an army of people out there culling information and fact checking so that we always get it right, because we know you're getting to where you trust us to get it right. So help us make sure we do.
Absolutely. And if I may, just a little plug, I blog pretty much daily, sometimes more than once daily, at Late in the Day. And I also have a Substack newsletter called Precipice, where I post 3 times a week or so.
Okay.
So please, if you want more of that viewpoint, that's where you can go for that.
You will find a link to those in the notes from today's show.
Yeah. And so thanks again for tuning in. And we like to see our community grow. And in the meantime, till we meet again, stay vigilant about your freedom.
Well, that's an interesting development.